you're in for the second round, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, this is the first time with this panel.
All right. Okay.
First time.
Good.
We had Administrator Fox here earlier talking about PFAS, and so I'm going to give you all a question really along for the entire panel. What types of tools would be helpful in addressing the impacts to water infrastructure that, especially I'm concerned particularly about rural communities, when it comes to PFAS, and what are some of the tools that you've seen that are going to be helpful as we go through this rulemaking to be able to make sure communities can comply? So just whichever one wants to start first. Do you want to start, Mr. Heyman?
Well, with PFAS, I think a couple of things. One, it's important that we understand what are we looking at, that we understand what the numbers are. We're going to be receiving a lot of new data on PFAS, so it's important that we work closely with the scientists and engineers to see what does that really mean. The other part of it is that anything that we do with PFAS is going to be an additional cost. It's going to be an additional burden to the ratepayer. And so it's going to be imperative that we receive some funding to assist us in making sure that we're not putting upon the ratepayer a burden that they can't carry or additional bills that they'd have to cover. Basically, though, I would say that we're going to have to work with our engineers to evaluate it, to make sure we have the machinery to do it. Now, I have to say this, and I'm very proud of Philadelphia. We're often on the cutting edge, and on this issue, we're on the cutting edge of evaluating PFAS. We have been doing that voluntarily for over a year, and we have been putting the information that we find on our website. And also, too, we have been transparent. And I think, too, that's going to be a major part of being successful as a water utility in this country, that we cannot go back to how we operated in the 1950s, 1960s. There's a need to be transparent, and we have done that as far as releasing information and keeping the public informed. So I think we have to make sure we have the machinery we need and the equipment we need to analyze it. We have to understand what we're looking at, and then we have to be transparent as far as releasing information and educating the public on what we have.
And so do you have an idea of how much, just ballpark, what it's going to cost to be able to do that?
I don't know, and in all honesty, the law just changed, or the requirements just changed yesterday. It is now 4 parts per trillion. Before it was in Philadelphia, I think it was about 14 parts per trillion. So we're going to have to evaluate it and make decisions as we go forward.
Great, thank you. Mr. Sigmund?
So we are just in the process of starting an evaluation, data collection and evaluation process for PFAS in our system. We're expecting to spend between our utility and working with our significant industrial dischargers who we believe might discharge PFAS, probably in the vicinity of $100,000 to $200,000 a year for the testing and the analysis. So that's going to be the first step for us to try to understand where this is coming from. That testing process is not easy. The analysis process is not inexpensive, so that's a big part of it. One thing I wanted to mention, probably the biggest concern for myself as a utility, is CERCLA in terms of from PFAS. As the rule is currently written, wastewater utilities, even though the EPA says they do not plan to call us as a principal responsible party, my utility experience with PCBs over about two decades was that we spent in excess of $1 million to both through legal fees as well as being considered to be a de minimis party. So yes, EPA says we're not going to consider you to be a principal responsible party, but that doesn't mean that the principal responsible parties won't come after us for contribution. And that is, I think, going to be one of the biggest concerns for utilities, is being brought into that entire process, and that's why we hope that Congress will grant an exemption to clean water utilities.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Emery. Ms. Emery, I'm sorry, Mr. Sigmund. Ms. Emery?
I do share some of Mr. Sigmund's concerns on the part of the utilities. In West Virginia, we've spent the last couple of years doing an assessment of all raw drinking water sources in the state, just to try to determine where this is located, at least starting with the drinking water utilities. We're doing further analysis, further testing, finished water, trying to find out the source of the contamination. That being said, we're trying to be very strategic on how we address this, where it's located, where it is coming from. So one of the suggestions we would have is allowing more monitoring to be used out of this emerging contaminants funding. it does say that we can use monitoring, but it has to be specifically tied to an upcoming project. But our POTWs are worried about the expense of monitoring on themselves. So the flexibility to use this funding to do just monitoring and studies, just to figure out the realm of the problem we have, would be very beneficial.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Chairman?